Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. How much would you invest in something that could never go up in value but only go down? Well, nothing. That sounds awful. Then why are you so heavily invested in this exact vehicle? In fact, chances are you have a substantial sum of money that you didn't even know you had today on Get Rich Education. MC Lobsher is the host of the Cashflow Ninja podcast and president of Producers Wealth. He is on a mission to help you achieve financial independence and freedom as soon as possible. He achieves this by integrating the infinite banking concept with real estate investments to increase your returns and recapture cash flow that you are not even aware of that you're losing. MC shares the number one strategy of investors in his holistic wealth creation course at yourownbankingsystem.com.
Learn the easiest way to create wealth and passive income with real estate. Now you can access the best deals without the stress or hassle of having to find, renovate, or manage those investment properties. Narada Real Estate saves you time by providing you with passive income investment properties in some of the best U.S. markets. Learn more at passiverealestateinvesting.com and download your free copy of the ultimate guide to passive real estate investing. There's no obligation and nothing to buy. Simply visit passiverealestateinvesting.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Here it is. Hey, welcome to Get Rich Education, episode 238. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. If you had enough money to pay off your home mortgage right now, would you? Many people would. In fact, some people think that part of the American dream is to own your own home and own it outright, mortgage-free. If that dream is so wonderful, well, then why do countless financially successful people who have more than enough money to pay off their mortgage refuse to do so? Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, for example, got a mortgage for his home, although it was totally unnecessary. My own home that I live in, my primary residence, could be paid off this week if I wanted to do it, but instead I have the maximum amount of debt against it that I can find, and over time I refinance it so that it stays that way and pull that cash out. Well, chances are you've got money that you didn't even know that you had. Now, this is a topic that I talk about every once in a while, so I want to bring a fresh angle to it today. You see, some people have believed the same old antiquated thing, these same old notions for such a long time that they figure that this notion that has been believed for so long, it must absolutely be true, and that's merely because it's been believed for such a long time. Yes, just because you believe something so long doesn't make it true, like desiring a paid-off home or thinking that's a good thing. A paid-off home means that you have lost your leverage. A lot of times, people need to unlearn the old before they can make room for new ideas. Eliminating your debt can actually postpone your financial freedom. You need to form both the habits and actions that produce income streams. You want to move toward financially free. Financially free means you can do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. Debt-free just means you don't owe anyone anything anymore, but you usually grind and eat dirt and work until you're old to try to get into that condition. Well, you can't do very well building income streams if you put your money toward retiring debt instead. So focusing too much on becoming debt-free means that your money is being sent away to retire and not work for you anymore. That's why you can't retire. You can't retire or be financially free because you sent your money away to retire rather than work for you, and more accurately, rather than using your money to leverage other people's money to work for you, like you can with investing in income property. If you could invest in something that could never go up in value but only go down, then how much of that investment would you want? Well, of course, zero, right? I mean, here we have cultivated a listenership of pretty intelligent people that invest for the production of income and not speculate on the hope for a capital gain. The investment that can never go up in value, but only go down in value, is home equity, or even your rental properties equity, just the same. I embrace mortgages. I don't fear them. Many Americans, Canadians, Australians, British too, everywhere, they all believe these statements to be true, these following statements. But in reality, these are all myths and misconceptions. Here we go. Your home equity is a prudent investment. That's false. Extra principal payments on your mortgage save you money. That's false. Mortgage interest should be eliminated as soon as possible. That's false. Substantial equity in your home enhances your net worth. That's false. Gosh, the SEC even excludes letting you count home equity toward your net worth in your accredited investor qualification. And finally, home equity has a rate of return. Well, that statement is completely false. The rate of return from home equity is, and always will be, zero. There is a reason why so many people fear mortgages and why you shouldn't. So let's go back and find out why that is first, okay? Discovering how our great-grandparents and our grandparents and even our parents, and perhaps even you, got this idea that a mortgage is a bad thing and a necessary evil at best. We really have to go back in time to the Great Depression, and then we're going to bring it up to the present day here. In the 1920s, a common clause in loan agreements gave banks the right to demand full repayment of your mortgage loan at any time, just like on a whim. Since this was like asking for the moon and the stars, no borrower really worried about that or thought that that was going to happen. But then when the stock market crashed on October 29th, 1929, millions of investors lost huge sums of money, much of it on margin, meaning people back then had borrowed to invest in the stock market. Back then, you could buy $10 of stock for $1. Well, since the value of stocks dropped, few investors wanted to sell, so they had to go to the bank and take out cash to cover their margin call. It didn't take long for banks to run out of cash, so banks started calling mortgage loans due from good everyday Americans who were faithfully making their mortgage payments every month. However, there still wasn't any demand to buy these homes. We were in the Great Depression, so prices continued to drop there 90 years ago. To cover the margin calls, brokers were forced to sell stocks. And once again, there wasn't a market for stocks, so prices kept dropping. And ultimately, the Great Depression saw the stock market fall more than 75% from its 1929 highs. And it took a long time for it to recover. More than half of the nation's banks failed, and millions of homeowners couldn't raise the cash that they needed to pay off their loans. They lost their homes. Born out of this destruction is this fear-based American mantra that said, always own your home outright, don't carry a mortgage at all. And the reasoning behind America's rationale is pretty simple. If the economy fell to pieces, well, at least you still had your home, and then the bank couldn't take it away from you. Maybe you couldn't put so much food on the table or pay some of your bills, but at least your home was secure. Well, we don't live in that world anymore. Since the Great Depression, laws have been introduced that make it illegal for banks to call your loan due. The bank can no longer call you up and say, hey, we're running a little short on cash and you need to pay off your mortgage in the next 30 days. The phone call just cannot go like that. That cannot happen today. Also, the Fed is now quick to infuse money into the system if there is a run on the banks, as we saw in 1987 and we sort of saw with quantitative easing 10 or 12 years ago. Also, the FDIC was created to insure banks. Still, you can see how this fear of losing their home became instilled in the hearts and minds of the American people, and they just continue to pass along to future generations that a mortgage is a bad thing. In the 50s and 60s, families would throw mortgage burning parties to celebrate paying off their home. And so because of this fear of the mortgage, for 90 years now, most people have overlooked the opportunities their mortgage provides for you to build your finances and not jeopardize them. So there is this reason why people hate their mortgage and why you shouldn't. People dislike their mortgage because they know things like over the life of a 30-year loan, they will spend more in interest than the house cost them in the first place. So to save money, it then becomes very tempting to either make a bigger down payment in the beginning or to make extra monthly principal payments along the way, or do both. But unfortunately, saving money is not the same as making money. Or put another way, paying off debt is not the same as accumulating assets. By tackling the mortgage payoff first and the investing goal second, a lot of people fail to consider the important role a mortgage plays in getting you to financial freedom. Every dollar we give the bank toward a mortgage paydown is a dollar then that we did not invest. While paying off the mortgage saves us interest, it denies us the opportunity to earn greater interest with that money. Let's say your monthly mortgage payment right now is $2,100 and you decide to pay $2,200 this month, an extra $100. Well, here is what you're saying to the bank. Hey, Mr. Banker, here's an extra $100 principal payment. Don't pay me any interest on it. If I need it back, I'll pay you fees, borrow it back on your terms, and plus I'll try to prove to you that I qualify again. I mean, who would do something like that? Well, some people do. A lot of people still do that. That is fear, scarcity, and a lack of education rather than knowledge, abundance, and mastery. Money you give the bank is money you'll never see again unless you refinance or sell that property, whether that property is your primary residence or it's one of your income properties. So, well, why separate equity from your home then and do the opposite thing rather than build it up with an extra principal payment? Why would you want to have the equity removed from your home? And there are actually three primary reasons. Number one is liquidity. Number two is safety. And number three is rate of return. And there are a bunch of other reasons too, but let's just focus on these. Number one, how liquid is it? Can you get your money back when you want it? Well, no, you can't if you pay extra principal. Number two, how safe is your money? Is it guaranteed or is it insured? No, equity in your home is not. And then thirdly, what rate of return can you expect? As we discussed earlier, exactly zero. So home equity fails all three tests of a classically prudent investment: liquidity, safety, and rate of return. So let's examine each of these core elements in more detail here to better understand why home equity fails the tests of a prudent investment, and more importantly, why homeowners benefit from separating the equity from their home. Why would you do that? Why separate equity to increase liquidity? Well, what is one of the biggest misunderstandings in both the real estate world and the mortgage world? It's that your mortgage is really a loan against your income more so than it is a loan against the value of your house. Because without an income, in most cases, you just can't get a loan. If you suddenly experience difficult financial times, would you rather have $50,000 of liquid cash to help you make your mortgage payment, or have an additional $50,000 of equity on the other side of the wall already trapped in your home? Almost every person who has ever lost their home to foreclosure, gosh, that person would have been better off if they had their equity separated from their home in a liquid, safe, conservative side fund that could be used to make mortgage payments during their time of need. And the importance of liquidity became really clear when the stock market crashed in October of 1987, or March of 2000, or September of 2008. Now, before each one of those events happened, you know what? If someone would have advised you to first sell your stocks and convert to cash, they would have been seen as a hero, like some brilliant prognosticator. Or if you had enough liquidity that you could have weathered that storm, those with other liquid assets, they were able to remain invested. So those people were rewarded as the market rebounded and recovered fully, sometimes pretty quickly in those cases. However, people that didn't have any liquidity and they were forced to sell while the market was down because they had equity in their home, that caused them to accept big losses. And some people learned, it is better to have access to the equity or the value of your home and not need it than it is to need it and not be able to access that equity and convert it to cash or liquidity. Now, of course, I don't advocate for people to have very much exposure to stocks anyway, because that generally is not where wealth is created. That's only where it's maintained. If you want to build wealth, you probably want to limit your exposure to stocks. And the formula is to maintain small equity positions in many income-producing properties. So that's the liquidity component. So let's talk about safety. To reduce the risk of foreclosure during unforeseen setbacks, keep your mortgage balance as high as possible. Is your home really safe? Really, a lot of home buyers have this misconception that paying down their mortgage quickly is the best way of reducing the risk of foreclosure on their homes. But in reality, the exact opposite is true. When homeowners pay down their mortgage, they are unknowingly transferring the risk away from the bank and onto themselves. When the mortgage balance is high, the bank carries the most risk. When your mortgage balance is low, the homeowner bears the risk. With a mortgage balance, the bank is in a great position because they stand to make a nice profit in case you default. Besides assuming unnecessary risk, a lot of people who scrape up every bit of extra money they can to apply to principal, they often find themselves with no liquidity. When tough times come, they find themselves scrambling to make their mortgage payments. All right, just imagine this scenario now. We're not going to have you in the role of the homeowner in this example. Assume instead that you're a mortgage banker at a bank. Let's put you in this position. You're the banker, and you're sitting in your cushy leather chair in your corner office, and you're looking at your loan portfolio as this mortgage banker that you are, and you have 100 loans that are delinquent, and all of the loans are for homes valued at $600,000. Okay, you've got all 100 of these $600,000 homes, and your borrower payments have become delinquent on every one of these 100 homes. Some of the loan balances are $300,000, and some of them are up at $500K. And what has happened is there is a glut in the market, and all these $600K homes now are only worth $400,000. Well, which homes do you as the banker foreclose on first? It's the borrowers owing the least amount of money to you, of course. Because after all, as a banker, you'd make money taking back those homes. However, you'd lose money trying to sell a home for $400K when you still be owed $500K on it from the borrower. So just instead, keep that property with a high loan balance in your portfolio as a banker. See, banks have been known to contact delinquent homeowners with high mortgage balances and offer assistance to those people. Banks are not going to try to foreclose on those people with the high balances. They extend a helping hand to those borrowers with high mortgage balances because in that case, as a mortgage banker in your plush leather chair, you're going to get on the phone with your homeowner borrower and you're going to say, oh, we understand you are going through some tough times. Is there anything we can do to help you? We really want you to be able to keep your home. Because see, the last thing that they want to do as a mortgage banker is take back a home that they're going to lose money reselling because that homeowner smartly kept their mortgage balance high because they still owe the bank a lot. Well, banks don't want to disrupt that if they're still owed a lot. So that example is done. You're no longer the mortgage banker here. You can see how you'd think, though, if you were one. You would foreclose on those that owe you the least, those borrowers with the lower mortgage balances. That would be more profitable for you as a mortgage banker because you're not owed as much. So now you as the owner of your own home or as the owner of your income property, you want to keep your mortgage balance high and your equity position low. If you fall ill or you become incapacitated in a car accident and you're not able to work, you want to be sure that your family is protected. Well, while you're in a hospital bed or worse, you're gone, the bank is going to foreclose on those homes that have the low mortgage loan balance first. Those with a high mortgage loan balance, they're the people that are going to get the workout. So more equity is more risk. So that's why I wanted to put you in the position of the mortgage banker in your leather easy chair earlier. See, now you see how they feel. That's why you should not vilify the banks with being ruthless in foreclosing on those with high equity positions. Because if you were given two equally difficult tasks and one paid you substantially more than the other, well, which task are you going to do first? You're going to take the more profitable one. And, it's interesting to note, too, during the Great Depression, the Hilton chain of hotels, they were deeply affected by the stock market crash, and Hilton couldn't make their mortgage loan payments. Well, you know what saved Hilton from financial ruin back in those days? They were so leveraged. In other words, they owed so much more on their property than it was worth that the banks could not afford to bother wasting their time foreclosing on Hilton. So do what the Hiltons did in the Great Depression. The Hiltons understood the value of keeping high mortgage balances, thereby keeping the risk on the banks and away from themselves. So bringing it closer to the present day here, hurricane-ravaged homeowners in Florida or New Orleans or Houston would have been better off if they had removed a large part of their equity and put it in other cash-flowing properties around the country, or they would have even been better off keeping it in a safe and liquid side fund accessible in a time of need. Ask yourself, if you're the resident of an earthquake hotbed like California or Alaska or Japan, and you own $1 million home during an earthquake in California, and you didn't have earthquake insurance either, like many people don't, well, then in that case, would you rather have your equity trapped in your earthquake-ravaged home, or would you rather have it in more income-producing properties in the Midwest and South, diversifying yourself? If it were trapped in the California home, your equity could be lost along with the house in the earthquake. What about litigation? In the event of a widespread disaster where an insurance company could be at risk with making massive payouts to a ton of homeowners, that insurance company often has an incentive to come up with a bunch of reasons to not want to pay the insurance claim or delay paying your claim, probably at a time when you're most vulnerable and you and your family are displaced and you're staying at a modest hotel while your life is in a shambles. We saw this happen in national disasters this last decade. If your home is rendered uninhabitable in the event of a natural disaster, and then there's this dispute about what exactly damaged your home, was it the hurricane's wind, or was it the storm surge, or was it the wind that led to the storm surge, or the hurricane's rain that led to the flood, or, what can you make a claim for then? Sometimes all this stuff gets held up. I mean, do you want to be in the scenario where you have to hire a lawyer to fight the insurance company, especially at a time when you and your family are vulnerable and uprooted, all while you're staying at a Motel 6? Well, if you have a lot of skin in the game, a lot of equity, you're going to be the one most likely to have to research what legal counsel is the best and then hire and pay for and retain legal counsel against the insurance company. But if you don't have much skin in the game, you don't have much equity, and again, you've left the bank with the risk and the greater equity position, then the bank, they're the one that's going to have the incentive to want to hire the attorney because you still owe the bank a lot of money. They want this deal to go through and not be disrupted. They want to keep that deal in place. So see, with every mortgage pay down that you make, you have increased the bank security in this property risk, and you've decreased your own security, and you've decreased your own peace of mind. More equity is more risk. And a lot of people think it's the opposite. Previously, you might have thought that paying down a mortgage increased your feeling of security. Sometimes you can get insurance to prevent risk of loss in the event of a natural disaster, tornado, hurricane, earthquake, or fire. But see, even then, there's no such thing as property equity insurance. So the homeowners with the least financial education are more likely to get foreclosed upon first. What if you've got a lot of equity in a property and you're hosting a birthday party for your kids and a neighbor kid falls off your deck? Well, now that neighbor kid's parents want to sue you. We live in a litigious society. When that neighbor's plaintiff attorney sees that you don't have much low-hanging fruit as equity to go after, the lawsuit might not even come your way in the first place. So a low equity position is an effective asset protection strategy. Make the bank share in the risk with you. Again, that's really an example of making other people's money work for you. Other people's money, the banks, they're helping protect you with that high equity position. My own home, my primary residence, has 15 to 20% equity in it. I've lived here almost 7 years. I practice what I preach. This limits my risk. It's increased my liquidity. So instead, I can turn these equity dollars into down payments on more income property all across the nation, and it increases my overall rate of return substantially. You've got to think about separating equity to increase your rate of return as well. I've got a question for you. What do you think the rate of return from home equity was in Boston just on average over the last 3 years? What about the rate of return from equity in Phoenix over the last 1 year? Any guesses on those? Just ballpark? Aha, it is a trick question. The truth is, it doesn't matter where you live or how fast the homes are appreciating. the return from home equity is always the same. It is zero. We have a misconception that because our home appreciates or our mortgage balance is going down, that equity has a rate of return, but that's not true. Home equity has no rate of return. Home values fluctuate due to market conditions, not due to mortgage balances. So your home or your income property's value is going to fluctuate on population growth or contraction, job growth, supply versus demand, or perhaps the remaining availability of developable land in your area, and all kinds of other factors. But the equity in the home has zero relation to the home's value. Equity is in no way responsible for the home's appreciation. Therefore, home equity just simply sits idle in the home, earning no rate of return. Assume that you have a rental property worth $100,000 and say that you own this rental property free and clear, and it appreciates $5,000 up to $105K. All right, well, you've got a 5% gain. But alternatively, if you have the $100K rental property and say you've only got $20K of equity in it, if the home appreciates 5%, you still own an asset worth $105K at the end of the year, but now you've got a 25% return on your skin in the game because you're leveraged, not just a 5% return like you would have had if it were paid off. That's because you got the 5% return on both your 20% down and the 80% borrowed from the bank. The return on both of those is yours. The market provides the return, whether equity is in there or not. Homeowners would actually be better off burying money in their backyards rather than paying down their mortgages, since money buried in the backyard is liquid, assuming you can find it, and that money buried in the backyard is also safe, assuming that no one else finds it. However, neither one is earning a rate of return. It's actually losing value due to inflation. I'll be back with so much more on this. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Finally, Total Control Financial gives you checkbook control of your 401k and IRA money to invest in real estate. It's time to get your retirement money into your own checking account, but you've got to avoid the little-known tax that you'll pay with any self-directed IRA. Instead, it's time for the QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000. For a real estate investor like you seeking an income property loan, go to Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. Over the years, you've heard President Chaley Ridge generously devote her time to you here on the show as a guest. Ridge provides investment property loans in most U.S. states, and you're going to find out how they've helped more people realize their dreams of real estate financial freedom than any other mortgage lender in the entire nation when you get started at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is Cashflow Diaries Jay Massey. Do the right thing, then do things right. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. Suppose you were offered an investment that could never go up in value, but might go down. How much of it would you want? Absolutely none. Yes, that investment is called home equity. It's something that I talk about in depth every couple years, so I'm bringing a different angle to it today. If home equity has no rate of return, so it can't go up in value, but it could go down in value if the real estate market declines or the homeowner experiences an uninsured loss like a natural disaster or your own body or mind's disability or a foreclosure, that's what could happen. That's why rather than paying down any mortgage, instead, once equity accumulates, I use cash-out refinances and 1031 tax-deferred exchanges to instead invest that dollar into more cash-flowing property. That is very much how I built my portfolio to financial freedom without the addition of very much of my own outside money. Well, what if the market goes down? Well, if I bought for cash flow anyway, then it won't crash the portfolio. This is investing for fundamental income production and not speculative capital gains investing. The return from equity is always zero, so I want to reduce my equity exposure that I have in any one property. But note that borrowing equity out of a property does incur an interest rate expense to you. But as long as you beat that interest rate expense incurred with the return from that reinvested dollar, now your dollar's ahead. And if I can borrow at, say, a 5% interest rate, sheesh, I've talked a number of times on how investing into new cash flowing income property with a long-term fixed interest rate debt attached to it pays you 5 ways at the same time, such that rates of return of 30% per annum are actually quite common. But importantly, you need the cash flow portion of your reinvested dollar in the income property to cover the debt, not the total ROI, but the cash flow, because debt is serviced with cash. Harvesting equity increases your velocity of money as well, rather than letting your equity slowly cut too deeply into any one property. Accelerating loan paydowns, well, that would cut my leverage ratio. We discussed leverage ratios before here on Get Rich Education. Let's talk about the cost of not borrowing. We're talking about employment cost versus opportunity cost. When homeowners separate equity to reposition it into more income property or even into a liquid, safe side account, a mortgage payment is created on the portion that you borrowed out. The mortgage payment is considered the employment cost. What many people don't understand is when we leave equity trapped in our home, we incur a cost, but we call it an opportunity cost. The money that's parked in your home doing nothing could be put to work earning you something. So create arbitrage for yourself. That means borrowing at a lower rate and investing at a higher rate, just like the banks do. Learn to effectively be your own banker. By using the principles that banks and credit unions use, you can amass a fortune. You can substantially enhance your net worth by optimizing the assets that you already have. We're talking about you having money that you didn't even know you had. By being your own banker, you can make millions extra over time. And it's not necessary to have a large chunk of equity in your home to benefit from using your mortgage to create wealth either. You can usually borrow up to about 80% loan to value on your primary residence. A lot of homeowners that don't have a large equity balance, they have benefited by simply moving to a more strategic mortgage, and that allows them to pay less to their mortgage company each month, and that way they can save or invest more each month. Even if you don't have a high equity position, for example, if you have a 15-year loan, you can obviously increase your monthly cash flow by switching to a 30-year fixed amortizing loan. You know, I once made this same mistake myself. One time I had a 15-year loan on my own home. That was a home with a nice view of a lake, in fact, and I changed it to a 30-year once I understood all of this. Okay, say that your 15-year loan monthly payment is $1,100 more than the 30-year fixed amortizing payment. Well, wouldn't I rather have that $1,100 per month either in liquidity or have it for more investment into an income-producing asset? On an income property, if you have a 15-year loan rather than a 30-year loan, well, that property probably isn't going to cash flow either. You know, I actually favor interest-only loans the most, but they can be pretty hard to find these days. But see, interest-onlys, they got a bad name 10 or 15 years ago because some people took out those loans because not paying monthly principal, that was the only way they could afford that property, a property that didn't even generate income. Well, that's not what I'm talking about doing here. I favor interest-onlys because rather than having your extra dollars go toward principal, those extra dollars go right into your cash flow pocket instead. With income property, both inflation and tenants make your mortgage principal balances erode every month already. If you get involved with making extra principal paydowns on top of inflation and tenants, well, that's something that only corrodes your cash flow dollar per dollar. Let's just look at another example here. I gave one similar to this in the book that I wrote in 2017. Let's say you own a $300,000 home, and just for ease of numbers, your home appreciates 10% and it goes up to $330K over some period of time. Well, let me ask you, did it matter how much equity was in the home? No. Again, either appreciation or loss in value has nothing to do with your skin in the game. It has nothing to do with that equity inside the walls of your home and everything to do with what's happening outside the walls of your home, like demographic trends, things going on outside the walls of your home, or a national tightening or easing of lending standards. Those are the things that affect market value. Now, instead, what about this second scenario? You've got this same $300,000 home with $100K of equity in it, and it drops down to $200K in value. Well, in that case, although the home's value fell 33%, your equity value fell 100%. It was a complete wipeout of your equity. Now you understand more about why property equity is deemed unsafe. So really, number one, prevent equity from accumulating in any one property. And number two, spread it around into other properties in different geographies. That is leverage. So now you set all these levers around various geographic markets. Just kind of imagine in your mind a little wedge, like a doorstop or something, beneath each of these homes' foundations, levering them up. When you do that, you've basically planted a small equity seed that has substantial room for growth in a new property. So I think big picture, rather than retiring mortgages, I'm acquiring mortgages and integrating them into my financial plan. Rather than fighting to get rid of mortgages, I've embraced them. I brought them onto my side, and I don't want them to go away. I use mortgages as a tool. You can think of your mortgage not as a competitor, but as a collaborator. Life is a lot more harmonious and plentiful when you turn competitors in your life into collaborators in so many ways. I don't just enjoy collecting properties, I enjoy collecting mortgages tied to them every time. I do not want to have my home or any income property paid off even by the time I'm age 50 or 100. When I pull equity from one property and use it as a down payment toward another property, note that I have not lost any equity. I've merely transferred it. It's still my equity. And note that you might have a corner chipped off of it for closing costs or agent commissions or things like that. Now, consider that when I pull equity from my primary residence to put into an income property, I typically incur a higher home mortgage payment than what I had had previously. But as long as the difference between the new home mortgage payment amount and the old payment amount is exceeded by the positive cash flow that I get from the new rental property, I am dollars ahead on a monthly basis and on an annual basis. Plus, I have all those other benefits of owning a real estate portfolio that's greater in total value. I now have two properties to potentially appreciate in value rather than one. You know, as I go through life, I really just keep finding that those with less financial education, they're the ones that say something like, oh, I just can't wait until I have this property paid off. Well, hearing this is sort of like when someone tells me that they have a boatload of money, $1 million at the bank, parked there, earning 1% interest. In either case, I'm kind of thinking, okay, I guess that's not completely bad. I see potential there, but now what are you going to do with it? In both cases, money earning nothing at the bank could actually be deemed better than home equity because it is more liquid. Understanding all this and putting it into practice is how I, as an investor, got ahead farther, faster. So instead of doing things like learning how to replace garage doors or how to efficiently clean a chimney, learn about big picture forces like arbitrage and leverage and cash flow and inflation. And really what we're talking about today, learn about smart equity management. That's just what we're talking about here. That's more powerful. That's going to get you ahead farther, faster than doing something like cleaning the clothing dryer exhaust ducts on your income property yourself. So outsource lower use tasks and replace them with higher use tasks, and you're going to be living better than you ever thought you could after a while. I think some people get content being their own landlord because they just don't realize what else they could do with their time. Think big picture, think scalability, think of building an empire with powerful investing concepts and not self-managing properties. A lot of these do-it-yourselfers instead for so long. They carry on beating around in an old Chevy Silverado pickup truck with a ladder and paint cans rattling around in the back, managing their own properties. I mean, you might do that in the beginning, but scale up as soon as possible. I think some people rationalize maybe that, well, my life's not so bad compared to those that live without clean water in Malawi or Eritrea. So they stay content trying to fix the furnace at the rental property themselves, but you don't have to be your on-site manager or laborer. As an investor, you already have laborers standing by just waiting to work for you. And these laborers have names like tenants, leverage, arbitrage, inflation. You need to know that there is a better, higher use way to live. Outsource lower use tasks and replace them with higher use tasks. And that's how you can live better than you ever thought you could. Now, if you had $1 to use and you'd have to use it to either pay down principal or pay toward interest, and it were one or the other, well, then of course you'd rather pay down principal because you'd have a chance at getting that dollar back later. Dollars paid to interest are just gone. But with a dollar paid to principal, there's still a wall that's been built between you and your dollar now because it's not liquid. Now, if someone would ask me if I would want more property equity than I've currently got, like someone was just looking to gift $1 million in equity to me, yeah, I'd take it. But I'd think of it like, well, now I've just been given the ability to disperse and distribute seeds and initiate that velocity and spread it into more properties. The thing is that you can't merely understand this stuff or else it's not going to help you. You've actually got to do it. You need to act to get some benefit from this. Mere knowledge isn't going to do you any good. I have conscientiously decided that I'm going to be abundant. Long ago, I said I'm going to go out and control more. Now, there are a few limits and a few more cautionary things here. You probably don't want to lock up everything in equity spread around various properties, like absolutely everything. It's good to keep some liquidity on hand. I've also talked about how it's a good idea to have at least 3 to 5% of your total real estate portfolio value in liquid funds as reserves. Consider that if you get underwater on your primary residence, it might make it hard for you to move if you do want to move. Think about your control in a property. You know, whether you have 5% equity in a property or a 60% equity position or a 100% equity position and is paid off, either way, you still have the same right to tear down the fence at your home's backyard or paint your home or add a carport to a rental property that you own. Your equity position, that does not affect your control at all. Lower equity position and you still have the same control. Less property equity also can increase your tax deductions because mortgage interest is often tax deductible. So no one achieves financial freedom just by eliminating their debt. In fact, debt elimination often slows financial freedom. Outsource that debt to your tenant. What I'm discussing today is really central to the Get Rich Education paradigm of financially free beats debt free. You know, sometimes I hear people say something like, well, just forget about the numbers. You know what? Eliminating the mortgage, that would just make me feel good. That way I won't owe anyone anything. I'll just feel good. Well, consider what that good feeling is costing you. Once you're educated, debt-free doesn't feel so good. You're actually taking steps away from being financially free. And you know, if you eliminate the mortgage payment on your own home, consider that you still have a monthly housing payment, okay? The mortgage payment is just one component of your overall housing payment. You're still going to have to pay property taxes, property insurance, pay maintenance, pay repairs, utilities, maybe even pay HOA dues. So even complete elimination of a mortgage payment, that doesn't nearly eliminate your housing payment. In fact, if you made extra principal payments on a 30-year loan so that you paid off your home in just 20 years, you might have only cut your housing payment in half. Yeah, that's right. You might have only halved it. And I know you might be thinking that your monthly housing payment is maybe 3/4 mortgage and 1/4 those other expenses. But look, over 20 years, your principal and interest payment stays fixed, and all those other housing expenses will catch up to it and rise. So accelerating your principal payments to pay it off 10 years early, that might mean that all you've really done is cut your housing payment in half. That's it. So even after all this scrimping, saving, sacrificing, a time in your life that you'll never get back for the result of a substantially early mortgage payoff, the result will be that you won't even feel like you've won. So even though I have the ability to pay off my home, that would be one of the more reckless and financially uneducated things that I could possibly think of. All the income producing property that I'd have to sell in order to make that payoff would be to my disadvantage. And some people say that they don't want to pull equity from their primary residence because they say that their existing mortgage is already at such a low interest rate, 5% or 4% or lower. Some people even got a rate of as low as 3.25% on their home when rates hit their bottom. Well, see, oftentimes you can keep that first loan in place, not touch it, not reset its amortization schedule, not disturb that rock bottom interest rate. I kind of do understand that. I mean, my primary residence has a 3.5% interest rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage. And what you can do then is add either a home equity loan or a home equity line of credit second mortgage onto the property so that you can increase your velocity of money. You can keep that first loan in place. You can have it both ways. Homes are meant to house you and your family, not for storing cash. So you may or may not maintain your own net worth statement, but in either case, if you do, on the left side of the sheet, you have a list of your assets and their total asset values down at the bottom. On the right side of the sheet are a list of your debts and their total debt value at the bottom. I add a third column over on the far right, which is the asset minus the debt. It shows the equity amount that I have in each property. That way I can easily see the equity percent that I have in each property. And once one property has more than 35 or 40% equity in it, well, then I know that it's time to start looking around to reposition it and keep my leverage ratio high. Keep your use of other people's money high. So when money talks, do you listen or do you revert to thinking about what your granddad thought or what your uncle thought, or revert to that depression era of thinking? You know, most or all of these principles that I've talked about today here are timeless principles. They were valid decades ago, just like they are today. So all this was true even when mortgage interest rates were 16 to 18% like they were in the early 1980s. You can take even greater advantage of this financially free beats debt free formula today when mortgage interest rates are comparatively tiny. So today's low interest rates really put an exclamation point on everything that I've been discussing with you today. You've got to go against the beliefs of traditional old-fashioned thinking the way everyone else does. So, well, especially if you're new to the show, maybe what you previously thought was black is white. What you thought was dark is light. If you act and implement this, your financial forecast looks substantially sunnier than you had thought. And you know what? You won't be able to retire if you send your money away to retire locked up in a home's walls. Now you'll need to spend more of your life working. I mean, the greatest selling financial author of all time, Robert Kiyosaki, he returned to the show with us again last month, as you'll remember. As you know, he famously said that a house, your primary residence, is not an asset. A house is not a financial asset. It is a liability because it takes money out of your pocket every month, and an asset puts money into your pocket every month. So consider not sinking so much of your equity into a liability then. You can keep your skin in the game in this liability, your home, to a minimum and place that equity into assets, cash flowing real estate assets in the best markets. Your home is a financial liability, and so is mine, but it's less of a liability to you when the equity is intelligently managed. I don't like to tell people exactly what they should do, but if this makes sense to you, you've got to act rather than sit idle on the information. I mean, these are the kinds of big strategic discussions that can shape you and your family's life, that open up time for yourself, financial freedom for yourself, that get your kid to summer camp so she could work on her basketball skills and you had time to go watch her, that get your family to Maui when you all drive the road to Hana rather than deferring everything until some fictitious someday. You've got to act. And the good news here really is that you might consider that you do have money to invest, money that you didn't even know you had. You've got to be responsible, though, converting home equity into a durable investment before consuming. So that's how I grew my portfolio. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what I did and why I did it. But I'll tell you one thing. Working from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a 1-hour lunch break in the middle of the day, Monday through Friday at a W-2 job with a 401k, that will not give you financial freedom until you're old, and that's in a best case scenario. So you know the old Chinese proverb, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime? Well, which one of those sounds better, teaching a man to fish or giving a man or woman a fish? Well, it's doing both, right? That's the abundance mentality. So at Get Rich Education, we teach a man to fish. Well, then where do you actually find the income properties in investor advantage markets with in-place property management so that you can intelligently reposition your home equity if you choose to? We also give a man a fish at greturnkey.com. That's where there are more than 15 markets that I've hand-selected myself. This is a lineup of markets and providers, many of whom I've invested with myself, where you can download a real estate report on Investor Advantage Metros, read it at your leisure, and then that report also has the provider information so that you can follow up with them should you so choose. Often it's those markets in the Midwest and South. greturnkey.com is in the show notes as well, so it has just never been easier. Thank you for being here. But again, you aren't here for me. You are here for you. I will be back next week to help you build your wealth. Remember, home equity is a terrible investment. Financially free beats debt-free. And don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
Countless investors get killed on their long-term maintenance costs in their rental property portfolio, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about my friends at JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model that allows clients like you to invest in new construction, turnkey rental property. That's why JWB has been featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and other national media. If you want new construction rental properties in your portfolio, talk to JWB. Give them a call at 904-677-6777 or visit them at newconstructionturnkey.com. The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.